All right, welcome back from the networking break. Now, next up in this room, this is room A, we have Jason Bickle with Increasing Trust and Retention, Social Presence and Distance Learning Design. And with that, Jason, I'll let you take it away.
Hey, everybody. My name is Jason Bickle, and I am talking about social presence. And I imagine in any given second, somebody's going to wonder why my video isn't running in our session here. And it actually has to do with what we're talking about today. So imagine, and you don't have to imagine too far, just listening to people talk or talking on the telephone or talking through Zoom or AirMeet or whatever it may be, and you're only staring at a static picture. Well, what we know from that is that social presence goes down, and that's what we're talking about today. So let me go ahead and I'll start my camera here. Um, well, that's interesting. It's not starting. So we'll continue here. All of a sudden, it's not allowing me to start my camera. Let's see. But everybody can hear me, correct? Over on the right hand side?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. For some reason, my camera won't come on like it did yesterday, so I'm not sure why. One second here. I'm just checking my settings here one more time.
Okay.
Sorry. We did this yesterday, but this actually fits in.
So, Jason, when you're in your settings, it does mute your camera and mic both. So,
Yes, but my camera it says it's unavailable now, although it's selected
I
correctly.
mean, we just were missing what you were saying when you were in there.
Yeah, I was just saying that my camera is selected, but it's just missing at this point. So I'm gonna switch gears here real quick. See you guys, because it actually is important to see me. So let me just do this. I'll move this over, and we'll just switch gears. But this actually makes sense to what we're doing. All right, can everybody see me here? Let me share my other screen.
We
And
did see you for a second, but I think your camera went back off.
hang on one second here. I think it flipped back over. Okay, there we go. We got it working. Perfect. And now you guys are seeing what I want you to. Excellent. So something had to cycle there. My apologies, everybody. I think you can see me now. Um, Although I think it's looking at the different screen here. Yeah. So let me fix that real quick. Mm-hmm. All right. So now I think we have everything synced to the correct screen. All right. You
Looks
guys
good.
can see my screen and you can see me. Sorry about that, everybody, but actually that feeds into exactly what we're talking about today. So let me pull this up. Let me just pull this over and we'll, I'm just adjusting something here. All right. Nobody's had any technical issues with dealing with screens or anything recently, have you? Okay. All right. So social presence. So as I started actually on purpose today, I started the presentation with me not showing video. And the reason for that is that's how a lot of our meetings and our trainings go is we start not showing our picture because we don't want to, people don't have cameras, etc. And what we're talking about today is social presence in that place there. Now, the interesting thing, just a little bit about me before we begin. I've been doing instructional design and multimedia development, e-learning, etc., for about 23 years. A lot of experience as a professor, etc. And I am also working on my PhD in learning technologies. And I am an avid oil painter, and I am the director of Learning DevCam. Um, been working with Torrance Learning for many years, and I was happy to talk about social presence today. Um, this is based on a paper that we wrote about 3 years ago on social presence in the human resource development piece. And it was an interesting theory, and I thought that it would be interesting for you guys to hear what social presence theory means and how it applies to instructional design. And we'll look at that specifically in Gagne's 9 events of instruction as well. So, question for everybody, you can open it up in your chat over here. Um, who did you learn from the most? Or the most from in your life, as far as your mentors, your coaches, teachers, parents? Who did you learn from the most? And if you could put that in your chat for me, I would appreciate it. Or if you want to jump in, if they can jump in with their mic, that's fine too. Anybody have any ideas on who you've learned from the most here in your life? Let me see where the chats are going. There we go. Just a different chat window here. So, my master's degree professor, one of the answers there. Okay. Anybody else? My father, sixth grade teacher. Okay. The interesting thing about who you learn from, think about these folks. Why did you learn from them? What did they offer you um, as far as who they were? Why did you learn from them? Any ideas there? Well, as you're pondering that, I will think about this. We learn primarily from people that are close to us, either virtually close or physically close to us. But fundamentally, we trust them, and they give us feedback. And because we trust them and they give us feedback over time, we learn more from them. Well, one of the issues with online learning, either asynchronous or synchronous, is that with our learners or with our students, for example, uh, they don't always trust us, especially in online environments, because they struggle with the concept, are we real? And especially with the different apps that we have today, where a lot of things are anonymous, or even where we're in places, um, you know, other applications where you're having conversations, you're not even sure if it's a real person or a bot. There's even more concern over social presence. Is this a real person that I'm talking to? So, what is social presence? Well, social presence theory is basically the idea, the perception that a person is real. Is the person on the other side of this technology, whether it's a phone or a Zoom or Meet or Teams or whatever it may be, a cell phone, for example, are they a real person? And if they are real, what is the percentage of real? Do I feel like they're 100? If we're in the same room together, it's 100% real, if you will. We know they're a real person, but we know this. We begin to form our social presence sort of percentage, if you will, that they're real based on immediacy. In other words, we get feedback from them in multiple channels. We'll talk about that in a second. And intimacy, how well we may know that person, and so. The social presence theory is how much do our learners believe that the facilitator or the instructor is real, and then also how much even the instructor believes the students or learners are real. And so, in that relationship, the more social presence, the more retention, the more learning that actually occurs. So, and that's because of trust. And some of your comments here, that it says I learned from people that convinced me they were capable, that I was capable. Um, they minimized fear. They helped me be responsible, right? Those kinds of things. And what that all boils down to really is trust. The more social presence we have, the more immediacy in response, the more intimacy that we have with a person, even through technology, the more trust we have, the more learning that actually occurs. Now, the reason this is important on the e-learning side, everybody can already see, is that a lot of our courseware may have um, video or even screen share at times and things, but much of it is text, graphics, animation. We're doing a lot, and even with interactivity, that social presence goes down. And is this a real instructor? Even on things like TikTok and stuff, there seem to be bots that are creating content and putting things together, and stuff like that. So, are we looking at something that was built by a real person? Now, the interesting thing is if we look at the transactional communication model, this is a very basic model of communication, and I'm just going to walk through this real quickly. Here you have the sender, the somebody creating a message and coding a message in a channel. Now, this is a single channel model, but in truth, when we're talking and communicating with people, no matter how we're doing it, there are actually many channels going on. Right now, we have a channel with AirMeet. We also have a verbal channel. We have a nonverbal channel that you see in the video. There's many communication channels in which I'm encoding a message, and then you, the receiver, is decoding that message. And that's based on all of those channels. It's not just based on just my voice. And so what's interesting is we are used to reading dozens, if not hundreds, of cues of channels and messages that we receive. People's body language, the way they move their hands, their feet, their eyes, their mouth, all of these things, including our voice and our intonation and the way we pronounce words, and are we being, satirical in the way we're saying things. We're reading dozens, if not hundreds of channels at a time to see if this person is real, social present, and can we trust them? Can we believe in what they are saying? And we're reading all this at once. Well, the interesting thing is when I stopped showing my camera, for example, as I just did, I just took away a bunch of those channels out of the mix. And all of a sudden, you were left to determine if I'm a real person or to trust me on a whole lot less information. So, what begins to happen when we develop e learning and online learning, or asynchronous or synchronous or whatever it may be, is that literally, um, if there is low social presence and some of these things are taken away, all of a sudden the communication model looks much more like this. We have stripped out so much and so many of the communication channels in trying to put things online. Now, the interesting thing is I want to go back and talk about attitudes, values, beliefs, motives, desires, and ideas. Each of us, both the sender, the creator of the message, and the receiver, that decoding that message, we have our own attitudes, values, beliefs, motives, and desires and ideas. And everything we communicate with is made up of those components, and everything that we decode with, the way that we understand messaging, is all based on our attitudes, values, beliefs, motives, and desires and ideas. And all of a sudden, we get into a synchronous or asynchronous online environment, and now a lot of that is taken away. When we do instructional design for online learning, we tend to strip a lot of the things down to the bare basics. Click file, open this, go here. We may tell a story, but it's very much in the use case of whatever we're trying to teach. But think about those teachers and the people that you've learned from the most, is that you knew a lot more about them. Knew a lot more about their background. You knew a lot of times about their family, about some of the emotions, some of the things they've been through. You knew some of their history. You knew some of their attitudes, values, beliefs, motives, and desires and ideas. And so, what ends up happening now when we go into the online mode, whether asynchronous or synchronous, is a lot of that gets stripped out because we think of it as quote unquote professional. But what ends up happening is we reduce social presence tremendously in that process, and all of a sudden, our instructional design can seem to become flat. In other words, there's a message, and we do get things across, and there is some success, but we're losing the richness of one person and the fidelity of one person teaching someone else from their attitudes, values, beliefs, motives, desires, and ideas. Okay. Now I'll stop right here for just a second. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts here? Have you looked at social presence before? Have you thought about it like that? Anybody? This just gives me a chance more than anything to take a drink of water. Okay. Well, The interesting thing is, once I started looking at this and looking and studying social presence, I became acutely aware that although I built a lot of online learning and delivered a lot of online training, that some of that fidelity wasn't there. But in natural, just who I am as a person, I am that person that you sit next to on the bus, and you will know everything about me in 5 stops. And so because of that, it's more natural when I teach to divulge more information that is, that may seem necessary at times. However, I've been told on numerous occasions that I'm able to build connections with my learners very quickly because I do that, because I give of myself as a person, as a human being. I divulge some of those attitudes, values, beliefs, motives, desires, and ideas. And sometimes it goes great. And be honest, sometimes I've gotten in trouble a little bit because some of those attitudes, values, beliefs have kind of come out, and it is, and so there is a risk at times, but to have trust and relationship with our learners is a risk. We have to give of ourselves, they will give back, and more social presence will increase, and therefore we will have more retention, more learning will actually occur. Now, I am going to need some feedback from you here. I want to get your thought process. Now that you know a bit about the communication model that we are just talking about, that most of you probably had seen, and also about social presence. Um, on the synchronous side, if I'm doing live instruction, what are some of the things that I could do to increase social presence um, with my learners? Christine says, do an introduction, short background at the beginning. Sure, it's a good idea. And engage in discussion forums. So whether you're synchronous or asynchronous, if you had discussion forums, engage. Okay. What would that engagement look like? Not just telling about ourselves, but we might be asking questions, right? Getting, asking questions to get them open-ended questions. What are your thoughts on this topic? Um, what is your experience in regards to this area of expertise? Those kinds of things, right? Tell stories of your content. Sure. Sure. I don't know. Some of you have, it's kind of, I'm dating myself a bit, but when they first started the Food Network star way back when on Food Network about new television chef personality or cook personalities, they're cooking and they were telling this, hey, I'm going to cut this up and it's 3/4 cup of this. And I like to cook, by the way. And they were going through and doing all this, but they would always advise them on camera. They say, hey, look, you have to connect these steps, these processes, these things you're teaching to your life. And so somebody would say, well, I need 3/4 cups of sugar. Oh, I tell you what, my nana always used 1 cup of brown sugar with 1 cup of real sugar, just to create the richness and sweetness, whatever. And it was all about connecting those steps with the personal story to connect the learner to what was going on. So absolutely, so tell stories. So let's take a look at what the research showed. So when we worked together, and we kind of took a look at the research from there. So on the synchronous side, the live side, okay, what we found in the research, increasing social presence, again, increasing that idea that the person on the other side is real, on the other side of the technology is real. One of the things that helps a lot with social presence is actually more experienced instructors. We found that those that were more knowledgeable or more experienced in dealing with the learners actually came across with high social presence. And remember, social presence is made up of two things, both immediacy, the feedback structure, right? How fast somebody can answer questions, how quickly they respond with something. Um, And then also intimacy, the ability to share about themselves. And so on the synchronous side, it was more experienced instructors, video face to face, right? So obviously, we've had video for a long time, but with bandwidth increases and platform improvements, video is much more common now, even more than it was 5 years ago. And especially with COVID and everything, a lot of things have improved on that side. So video and face to face, obviously, is very powerful. Ask learners, instructors to share thoughts, experiences, humor, personal information. I happen to live and I've grown up in Texas. And so we have what we call mental margaritas. So anytime I'm teaching and training, I say, hey, let's take a mental margarita. I may tell a story, and then usually that'll kick off somebody else telling a story. And we take a few minutes just to share experiences and stories and things in those times. Okay. On the synchronous side, we can also create a dynamic live environment that invites questions, discussions, collaboration, right? The more you can get people talking, the more they all agree that everybody has a higher social presence, and the more trust we have, the more retention that occurs. On the asynchronous side over here, more videos are better. Whether we've done studies in avatars and things, but everybody realizes that an avatar is really not a real person. So what begins to happen is media already social presence already goes down because we know that this is an artificial character. Now, that doesn't mean having an agent versus a learning agent versus not having a learning agent is not beneficial. It is. However, we have found in the research that videos of the actual instructor talking, even if it's just a snapshot at the bottom or a thumbnail at the bottom of the screen, increases social presence. Okay. We also, on the synchronous side, virtual collaboration spaces for discussion of materials. The one thing about this is a lot of places have that virtual collaboration space, but most learners don't use it. So somebody is going to have to model that behavior on where certain things occur in that collaboration space for it to be successful. Okay. The other good thing is that learners can submit their own videos. It's just as important for learners to show their real people as it is for the instructor. The instructor or facilitator um, can be more engaged. So even if it's asynchronous, um, students can still submit, or learners can still submit their own videos, and that will help the person facilitating the course get to know them as well. Virtual office hours, community notifications as we go, and then a searchable text-based environment. Now, we found this was interesting. If you have a searchable text-based knowledge base, for example, and you could search and find answers quickly, it was interesting. The authors of that knowledge base seem to have a higher social presence, and the reason is because of the immediacy of their response. I have a need, I have a question, I'm going to do a search, and then I get a response. And so people make the assumption that there's something intelligent behind that. Now, with the advances in AI that we have coming, the lines on this are becoming more blurred, but that immediacy actually helps the user or the learner trust that situation there. Okay. Does anybody have any thoughts or ideas behind these general ideas behind social presence? Just we're going to go through GAGNE'S nine instructional events here in a minute. But has anybody in their instructional design have you included social presence thoughts or ideas into your structural design? I'm just curious. Okay. All right. So now, what we ended up doing within the research that we were working on is we ended up saying, hey, here are the general design guides as far as synchronous and asynchronous learning goes. But what if we tie this to a specific design model? And I happen to be a big fan of Gagne, um, especially in the type of training and instruction that I do. And so he has his 9 events of instruction. I'm sure many of you have read or have some experience with Gagne, or at least seen it at some point. This works both for online instruction as well as classroom or live instructor-led instruction as we go through. But here are the 9 events, and let me just review these quickly for you. First and foremost, we gain the learner's attention. So this actually has dumping water over somebody's head, but we're trying to get them engaged and get their attention. We want to inform them of the learning objectives. This is where we're going. If you've ever tried to read a novel without reading the back cover first, it's very difficult to do. At least it is for me, because I need the structure, at least some idea of what's going on. So we're going to give the learner some objectives. What is your prior learning? We forget about this sometimes, I think, in our ID, but what do you know beforehand? And not only do we include it in our instructional design before we start class or our instruction, but we can also do it with the learners, and we can basically figure out some new routes and some new instruction based on what they already know. Then we present the content, right, in whatever method: synchronous, asynchronous, graphics, media, interactivity, whatever it may be. Okay. Then we provide guidance to what they're doing. So basically, little course corrections as we go along. This is kind of the coaching stage right here. Then we get into practice, allowing them to actually practice and do this. This is really a safe place for failure when we think about it, giving them some practice to do, and then provide feedback. So they've they've heard what we said, they're working on some things, they're practicing, then we give feedback. Then we come back and actually do a formal assessment of their or evaluate their performance. And then finally, how do we enhance retention? How do we make sure they've learned something and then transfer this to performance or to the job itself? And so these are the 9 events from Gagne that we have. And what we've done is basically now we're saying, okay, well, what would help social presence at each of these levels within Gagne's 9 events? Um, so now I have I'm just making sure I didn't lose the chat. There's the message. Okay. So, all right. So what we did is we tied the 9 events to our social presence recommendations. And honestly, I could have stripped all the slides and things down, but it was easier just to kind of show you side by side. And so these are just recommendations, and I'm sure through download you'll have access, or I'll give you access one way or the other. You'll have access to this PowerPoint. Um, but um, Up here is the gain attention, the beginning of things. So on the synchronous side, just like some of you are mentioning, on the gain attention, we can tell a story. We can ask a student about this training and what they expect. Do the learners have any questions? On the asynchronous side, um, well, let's go down the synchronous side and then we'll go to the asynchronous side. In the forming of goals, explain and discuss the intended expectations of performance and outcome. Ask for candid feedback and discussion. So notice this is not just informing, but we're asking them their ideas and thoughts. Stimulate recall and prior learning. Ask learners to recall and tell experiences. So notice that there's a recurring theme here with social presence, that intimacy. I'm telling of myself what I know, where I need to go, etc. Ask each person to speak, for example. Present the content utilizing video and screen sharing. Instructor shares content, so you're going back and forth. Instructor should solicit questions and discussion, giving examples, clarification, telling stories, and then provide learning guidance and real world examples there. And then provide learners with alternative sources for information. So notice that as a lot of those channels may have been taken away, okay, in our communication model, when we go back to our instructional design, we're finding as many ways to add channels back to the learning process. And those channels may include nonverbal with video, right? Nonverbal with intonation and hearing certain things that we're doing, body language, right? We're also adding, collaboration areas and places for chat, places, opportunities to tell stories. And so, even though we may not be always be able to see the other person, even in chat or even able just being able to hear them, or asking them to fill in the fidelity of a lot of those other channels, which helps increase social presence. If we continue down on the synchronous side here, as we elicit performance, ask learners to utilize instruction and recall our knowledge, have them perform that. Instructor has live feedback. Now, this is actually really important that the feedback be as live as possible or as immediate as possible. We've all had situations where we ask for feedback and it might be hours or days before we get it, and it loses its effectiveness because we're waiting on it so we can make adjustments almost immediately. And so that immediacy really comes into play there. Assess the performance. By the way, even if you're doing, I'm really big when it comes to evaluations, doing live evaluations if you can, and getting the feedback and the coaching that continues that process. And then finally, does it transfer to the job? Ask the learner team to describe what they've learned. So it's a lot to describe, a lot of telling stories. What did you pick up? Where did you go? Write this in this place, etc. And the truth is said on the other side too, regarding on the asynchronous side, right? It's very much the same. It's just now we're using a lot more video, a collaboration space, a narrated animation. Okay, the more voice there is, the better. Ask for candid feedback in the forums or whatever it may be. Um, Create, a collaboration platform. Utilize video narration. Ensure collaboration. It's a lot of the same things. In the end, in your instructional design, how are you creating higher social presence by providing immediate feedback, either live or asynchronous, through text, through video, through audio, etc. And then how are you creating more intimacy? And that's being of telling of the stories and the connection points between learners and the instructor. Okay. All right. Well, that being said, we have a few more minutes here. What does everybody think? I'm curious what you think about social presence and how it and where you might put it in your instructional design process as you're looking at things. Any ideas? I lost the chat. There it is. Okay, good. Okay. I have just now, it says we include SME pictures, videos, and use their voice as much as possible in language. Okay, that's good. Okay. Other ways that you might include social presence into your ID. What I really want you to walk away with is when you're doing your instructional design, whether you're using Gagne or other, or and honestly, I actually read a paper a while back, and it was the basic premise of the paper is how often do instructional designers use formal instructional design models? And the answer was almost never. It's like we have recipe books and then everybody learns how to cook and then nobody goes back to the recipe books, right? And so, what I really want you to take away from this particular session is, especially with online instruction, synchronous or asynchronous, go back and look at places where you can increase social presence, where content, even audio and video, is not enough. How do we make sure that the people on the other side trust us and trust our material and our content, so they're more likely to learn it? And if you think back to that initial question that I asked at the beginning, who did you learn from the most from, whether parent, aunt, uncle, teacher, professor, whoever it may be? One of the reasons you learned from them is not only did you believe that they were a real person, but you trusted them. You knew a lot about them, you knew their background, the fidelity, and all the, in other words, the richness of things that you knew about them was full, and so you're more likely to take things from them. The other place I use fidelity all the time is with vinyl or phonograph records versus CD. The interesting thing is a computer can determine what's outside of the audible spectrum as far as sound waves. There are sound waves that we can't hear, but we can feel. And so there's a lot of folks that have gone back to vinyl because there are vibration sound waves that we can feel. There's a richness, there's a fidelity there that that technology drops because it's outside of the audible spectrum. And social presence is very much a similar part or similar idea, is that there are a lot of things that we lose when we get into the technology side. There are things we gain, you know, it's easier remote access, 24/7 access, all these things that are valuable to us on schedule. But we do lose fidelity of the instructor, fidelity of the student, social presence of those people. And so, how do we capture that? What are other ways to bring back that into our design? Very much like the difference between a phonograph or vinyl record and a CD. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts today? See, Christian says, what are your thoughts on need importance of social presence for fully virtual learning without a peer learning component, standalone e-learning module? So let me just read the question so I understand. Fully virtual learning environment without peer learning. So again, as much as you can add sort of more, if you will, more humanity into the course, so it may be fully virtual, but the more some of it can be even your script writing, make your script writing more conversational, more natural, right? It doesn't have to be as formal. Even have some of the, have interludes where you're telling a little bit more about why you're teaching something, why it's important. Give personal examples. Honestly, they can be hypothetical. You can say, well, Jenny once experienced this, and that's okay. You don't, it's okay to give those type of examples as long as somewhere along the line they know they were examples. But if you attach them to a person, that's fine. Hypotheticals are great. It'll apply more connection. It will feel more real in there as well. Okay. Um, yeah. And even in the ways that you write questions, a lot of times we write very factual based evaluations. But what if we give scenarios that we've actually experienced, right? So even all along the way, and I hadn't thought about this until just now, but it's kind of adding the human back into the technology again, right? Technology, communicating through technology naturally strips out a bit of humanity in the process, social presence, right? Some of it just naturally goes away. Well, how do we put the humanity back into it? How do we put the connection, the intimacy, the relationship, that fidelity back into that? And there's just different ways of handling it. Any other thoughts today? Well, apologies about the little issues at the beginning because I wanted to start without my camera at a low social presence stage, um, and so we got stuck on that a little bit. But it's exactly what happens a lot to all of us is that social presence struggles. You guys are wondering who is this guy? You can't see my face, you can't see anything, and all of a sudden, once the camera comes on, now we have high social presence and there's a little bit more trust that comes in. And even in having mistakes and having issues at the beginning, interestingly enough, increases social presence because it's not perfect. And when we realize it's not perfect, hey, we're not perfect, we're all human, it works out pretty well. So appreciate your flexibility there. The last thing I'll say, I am the director of Learning Dev Camp 2023. We didn't have it would have been in literally a month in June. It's normally in Salt Lake City in the mountains of Utah, at University of Utah. And it is Learning Dev Camp is an e-learning, online learning conference for tips, tools, instructional design, product management, etc. We've been going along. This will be our 9th year. And it is a pure blessing for me each year to do that. I'm disappointed it won't be happening this year. But, I got married about 3 months ago and I'm moving into a new house. And so lots of other things are good. So So look forward. We just have a flat screen for the site right now for Learning Dev Camp, but that will be coming back in 2023. So excited. Torrance, I'm sure Torrance Learning will be a part of that. And so with that said, thank you everybody. Thanks for the time and the opportunity. Have a great day.
Thank you, Jason. That was fantastic. And if you are available for the networking break to join a table, I'm sure there might be some folks that'd like to chat with you there. So
Yeah,
we are going to
absolutely.
end. Yeah, we are going to end this session now and send everybody back out to the tables. If you want to hang out in this room, coming up next, we have Learn About Your Learners with Maps and Personas. Or if you want to hop over to Room B, it's Getting Engaged for Keeps. That's about increasing learner engagement in a virtual setting. So thank you again, Jason. Thanks
Yeah,
to you,
absolutely.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.